In today's video, I want to show you how to transfer quilt motifs to your quilt projects. Hi, I'm Kim Jamieson-Hirst of Chatterbox Quilts, and there are lots of different ways to transfer motifs to your quilt so that you can follow those designs and get that exact motif on your quilt. And of course, the easiest way to do that is by using a light box and tracing that design onto your quilt with some type of an erasable marker, all right? But sometimes you have a quilt that is really dark colors, and even through the light box you really can't see very well to trace that design onto your quilt. So then what do you do? Well, there's different things that you can do, all of them fairly simple. So first off, you need to have a motif, right? So I have pulled a motif from this romance collection by Harry Wallner. And if you look on the back, I know it's an oldie but a goodie, right? If I look on the back, you can see all the different designs. And because I'm using, I have 12-inch blocks in my quilt, I was looking for a design that would pretty much fill up that whole square, that whole block, and this Aphrodite, which is 11 inches, is perfect. So this is what it looks like. These come in different little pages inside with several designs on each page. But here's Aphrodite here. Okay, so what I like about this is that it's nice and dark because I am going to be doing some tracing with it, but I'm going to be tracing it not onto my fabric but onto something else. So different choices, okay? One of my favorite ones to use is golden threads, okay? So if you're not familiar with golden threads, what it looks like this. If you're familiar with onion skin, that's what it reminds me of. It's see-through. It's noisy, but it works very well. Okay, so what I did is I just took this, placed it over top of the design, and I traced it using a Sharpie ultra fine point marker. So this is a permanent marker, so I'm not leaving this anywhere near my quilt, okay? So you don't want to use that on your quilt, don't do that, but it's great for tracing. It gives you a nice thin line, okay? I don't want too thick a line. And then once I've got it traced, there's a few different things I can do with it, okay? One of the things I can do is I can, first off, you're going to center it on your design. You can do some measuring if you want, or for me, I like to just kind of eyeball it. And it looks about right there. So I could leave it like that. I could pin it, of course it would be my quilt sandwich, and I would pin it, you know, outside the design so that it is affixed to my quilt sandwich. And then I can go to my machine and I can just stitch over all the lines. And this is continuous, so you can kind of go along and find your way through this. I'm not doing a very good job right now, but it's not that difficult to do. So you could do that, and then when you're done, you would just tear this off. It tears very easily, okay, and that's typically what people would use this particular product for, okay? If I wanted to do that technique, the stitch and tear, I could also use parchment paper. Slightly noisier than the golden threads, okay? So just regular parchment paper. It's usually used for cooking, but I use it in the quilt studio a lot as well. So you would do the same thing. You would draw your design on this, you would stitch it down, and then you could just tear it off, okay? You would pin it, I should say. Pin it down, then stitch it, and tear it off, okay? Or some people like to use Glad Press and Seal. Not my necessarily favorite thing to do with this product, but you could. And it's noisy too. They're all noisy, right? That's what they have in common. But it's noisy getting it out of the box, not so noisy here. But again, you could trace it on, and then the advantage of this one is you can just lay it down. Okay, you have to smooth it all out, but it does stick temporarily to your quilt top, okay, so you don't have to pin it down. The disadvantage of this is the size it comes in, okay, because you can see it's barely, I think it's just barely 12 inches. So depending on the size of your block, I mean, there's the same thing with the other products. They're a certain size, so you might have to, you know, tape a couple of them together to get the size you need, okay? But you can use that too, and again, you would stitch it down and tear it off. But as you see, with this design, it took me a while to trace this, okay? It's not just 2 seconds and we're done, okay? So once I've done all that tracing, I really don't want to just stitch and tear, right? That seems kind of wasteful to me in so many ways. Instead, what I like to do is reuse it, okay? So I could do that with this product. I could do that with the parchment paper, not so much with the Glad Press and Seal. I don't think it's going to work with that one, okay? But what you can do is you can go to your sewing machine and you can stitch, sort of stitch, along the design. And I'm going to show you how to do that. But then what you would do is you'd be able to use a marker, or you'd be able to use Pounce, or in this case I've got Miracle Chalk, to then transfer that design to your quilt sandwich. But then you can use this as a template, take it off, move it to the next block, and do it again. So you can use it multiple times. So draw once, use it multiple times. So let's see how you can prepare this to be used as a template that we can use several times to transfer our motif to our quilt sandwich. So if you want to use that template, I'm going to call it, multiple times, the easiest way to do that is to stitch along the design without any thread in the top. So you're just making holes in it. That way you can use Pounce powder or some similar, marking pencil to go through the template to mark your quilt sandwich, and then you just take it off and you can reuse it again. So to do that, you take the thread out of the top of your machine, which seems so weird. And you can use an older needle if you wanted to do that, because the bigger the holes, the better the pounce, right? That's going to go through. And on some machines, like the one I'm working on today, I have an automatic thread break sensor on that top thread. And so I have to turn that off. Otherwise, I go about 5 stitches and it's going to beep at me and not want to continue on. So I turned that off. I just have my needle in the machine and I will just follow along slowly. And you have to be careful. I will turn as I go along, so just be careful because it's easy to rip the golden threads paper. And just keep going along. And I find I have to stop and lift the foot up to turn, because if I try and turn otherwise, it's not like you can turn fabric sometimes. I'm afraid I'm going to rip this paper, so I stop, turn, foot comes up, I turn, and then we continue on. I don't know if you can hear that little squeak, squeak kind of noise it makes. It's kind of funny. As you can see, when I moved it there, you can see it tore the paper just slightly. So you do have to be careful. All right, so now it is ready to use with a marker or Pounce powder to mark your quilt top. Now I've done that with part of the design here, okay, not all of it, but part of it, just so I can show you, and I have to figure out where I've done that. Here it is, you can feel it actually. So then I would take, in my case, I'm going to use this is Miracle marking kit. It's chalk, I should say. It has the Miracle, well, there's a kit that came with it, so it's got the chalk and it's also got the pad and everything too. So what, excuse me, what I do with this, some people don't know how to use this, so here we go, more noise. Okay, I'm just going to slam it down a bit. That gets the chalk down into this surface here, okay, which is where we want it. And then what we're going to do, and I'm still fussing with this to get it the way I want it to be and make sure I'm over in this area, is we're just going along like this. Okay, I had this stitched through here somewhere. Let's see how I can do that. Okay. And I might need to put a little bit more chalk in here, but we should be able to see our design. I know it's quite faint here because I need a little bit more chalk, but you can get other colors as well, although I do prefer the white. So you can see enough of that design going on there that you could then stitch it, and then you could take this and reuse it. So the one thing is, like I said, you need to slam it down to get the chalk down into the applicator area. And also you do not, even though it's called Pounce, the other product, similar product, you do not go up and down like this, okay? You smooth it across. You saw me smoothing it, and I would smooth from the center out, okay, to do that, to transfer that design. And then you can just lift it up, move it to the next block, continue on. Now, advantages, disadvantages. Let's talk about that, shall we? Okay, advantages. I can trace once, use it multiple times. Yay! Disadvantages, depending on what I'm using. And you could use this, I haven't done this, but you could use this with an erasable pen or marker and go along there and see how that transfers through. I'm not sure if it'd be quite as effective as using the chalk because the holes are quite small, okay? But the advantage of this is that you can use it multiple times, okay? The disadvantage of this is if you're using the chalk on here, it means that when I'm done transferring a motif, I am going to go do some quilting probably, because while it's not air erasable, if you start brushing up against it or something, you start losing the chalk, right? So the chalk will come off eventually if it's getting moved around and not being stitched right away. So if you're using this technique, you want to go, you're going to do this just before you're going to actually go and start quilting with it, right? But I like it because you can use this multiple times. I can even keep this, as you can see, it's just going to roll itself right up. I could just keep this and use it on a totally different project in the future, all right? So you could do that. And I find it really helpful when you're working on a quilt where if I tried to put this over a light box, I don't think I'm going to be able to see through it very easily to transfer my design. It's just going to cause a lot of frustration, right? If you do it the other way around, where you put it down and you're going to tear it off, well, you've drawn once, stitched once, off it goes, okay? So I'm not as much of a fan of that technique as I am about drawing once and using it multiple times, because it saves you time, and time saved means you can then be quilting your project, right? So if you have run into a problem where you've got a quilt top that is too dark and you cannot transfer your motifs onto it, get yourself some golden thread. If you're wondering where you can get that, check up above or in the description below. I'll have a link for it and for the parchment paper and the Glad press and seal, so you can try them out and see how they work. And you can draw your motif, transfer it to your quilt top, and get quilting right away. Now, if you're wondering how to audition your quilt motifs onto your quilt, don't worry, I got you covered. Check out this video that has all the information that you need. And for helpful quilting information, be sure to go to my website at www.chatterboxquilts.com.